Hello, or should I say, ooh la la. I am Gordon Kendall, and this is the National Arts Club at Home Fashion Series, sponsored by the National Arts Club Fashion Committee. And our guest tonight is Karan Feder, to present her book, The Folies Bergere in
Las Vegas.
I appreciate your support of our speakers as they present for us. And so before that, a huge shout out to excuse me, before that, a huge shout out to our very own fashion committee who works behind the scenes to bring the presentation to you, and to our Zoltan of Zoom, our impresario of the internet, our very own Mitch Case, who works behind the scenes to bring this together from the tech side. So thank you, one and all. And if you are new to the series, the National Arts Club is a 501c3 not-for-profit arts organization founded in 1898 and located in New York City, with the stated mission to stimulate, foster, and promote the arts. And we have just received word, in fact, from several fashion design institutions and educational programs that they're using these programs in their curriculum to teach a new generation of students about such things as Las Vegas costumes. So tonight, we're going to go from New York City's Gramercy Park, or wherever the Zoom world has us, to Las Vegas to learn more about the world of Folies Bergere and the incredible costumes for which they are, among other things, known. And there is absolutely no better person to do that than our guest, Karan Feder. She's a leading expert in entertainment costume, history, presentation, and exhibition. She's the founder and president of Entertainment Exhibitions in Las Vegas and has extensive background designing fashion accessories. I believe she had her own fashion line, and in curation, where she has worked at the Nevada State Museum for curating costume, and is an author of numerous articles and books about the fashion influences of such people as Marilyn Monroe, Star Wars, Elvis, and Liberace, where she had previously served as the president and director of the Liberace Museum in Las Vegas. And so it's with great pleasure, Karan, we welcome you. And so, in 1959, the Folies Bergere comes to Las Vegas, where it was called Saucy, Piquant, and Racy. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, Las Vegas at that point in time was in the business of embracing Parisian music hall shows. And one of the first ones to land here was Lido de Paris a few years earlier than Folies Bergere. And then in 1959, the Folies Bergere managed to license their show from Paris to play here on our Las Vegas stage. And it was a big coup for the Tropicana Hotel to get that license, but it proved incredibly successful. And so that's what we are going to talk about this evening.
Right, dive in. You have a presentation for us, I believe.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I am really thrilled to be here with you this evening, and thank you again to Mr. Kendall, and thank you to Angela Louie for the invitation to speak to the National Arts Club audience. One positive development I feel stemming from the COVID lockdown is my discovery of the National Arts Club webinar series. I have found these programs to be really fascinating and a welcome opportunity to engage with the cultural community. So it is my privilege to talk to you today about my recent book release called The Folies Bergere in Las Vegas. This illustrated presentation will share both information found in the book and additional supporting research not published. The program is offered as a celebration of the cabaret art form and is admittedly shaped from my specific perspective as a costume historian. I would be interested to know if there are any Folies Bergere alumni with us today, so perhaps you'll introduce yourself in the chat. I am currently serving as the guest curator of costume and textiles at the Nevada State Museum, Las Vegas. And in that capacity, I've had extraordinary opportunities to research the unique performance costumes which have appeared on the varied stages of Nevada. In my quest to identify and define these objects, I have discovered that there is a great wealth of information found in the underlying narratives of the folks who work with these performance costumes. This slide pictures a few of the interior name tags as found in the State Museum's Folies Bergere costume collection. The name tags identify the performer assigned to wear the costume, and to me they are symbolic of the vast number of individual stories awaiting acknowledgement. I'm delighted to have the good fortune to interpret this fascinating culture and the varied stories told. In 1957, the Hotel Tropicana, nicknamed the Tiffany of the Strip, was the most expensive and swanky resort ever seen in Las Vegas. This photo shows an aerial view of the Tropicana on the Strip in '57. This slide pictures early signage and the property's signature tulip water fountain. The Folies Bergere debuted at the 2-year-old Tropicana on Christmas Eve in 1959 and eventually earned the title as the longest running cabaret show in Las Vegas. The Folies Bergere was a traditional French cabaret show. The classic cabaret production adheres to a timeless formula that includes elaborate and visually resplendent numbers featuring male and female dancers, singers, leggy showgirls, and amazing acrobats. Shown in this slide are dancers in their cabaret costumes from the 1928 edition of the Folies Bergere in Paris. Note, the physical form of the dancers is more voluptuous than the preferred athletic form of our modern showgirls. Within the cabaret genre, the iconic Las Vegas showgirl is a symbol of ideal feminine beauty and a cultural archetype. As such, her physical silhouette is continually adjusted to suit the fashion of the era. The Folies Bergere was imported to Las Vegas from the Parisian Music Hall, where sophisticated, stylized French titillation was offered nightly. This charming show program introduces the Folies Bergere to American audiences as the show that made Paris famous, and further boasts a cast of international mademoiselles and continental stars. The program dates from 1960 and details the musical revue's first production in America. Note that Lou Walters receives top billing as the production's producer. Walters is credited as the impresario responsible for securing the rights from Paris to present the Folies Bergere in Las Vegas. He also happened to be the father of famed broadcast journalist Barbara Walters. Showgirl Carolyn Collette remembers Lou Walters and his family were often seen backstage at Folies Bergere rehearsals and performances. Collette is pictured in this slide in costume on the Tropicana's Fountain Theater stage in 1962. The show program at left credits Collette as one of the, quote, 80 exciting stars cast in this edition of the production. Parisian Michel Guillarmati served as artistic director of the Folies Bergere in Las Vegas from 1959 to 1974. Throughout his long career with the production, Guillarmati additionally worked as set designer, graphic artist, and costume designer. Marie Chevalier, the acclaimed French actor, comic, and cabaret singer, described Giarmati as an artist whose imagination and inventiveness, both in writing and design, would appear to be inexhaustible. The photo at right pictures Giarmati during rehearsals at the Hotel Tropicana before the show's debut in '59. At left, we see a Giarmati working sketch for one of the production's extraordinary costumes. In a 1959 newspaper column about the debut performance of the Folies Bergere, Hank Greenspun writes, "Every act is terrific and magnificently produced in rare good taste. There are nudes, but not just the standing around kind. These are occupied nudes, guaranteed not to offend anyone's sensibilities." An editorial review of the 1969 edition of the show described the production in this way, quote, "One of the most impressive things about the new Folies Bergere is its tasteful handling of nudity. There is no nudity for the mere sake of nudity itself, and even the famous Folies Bergere mannequins are not completely topless. These photographs feature a time-honored ornament of the cabaret costume genre known as the pasty. The pair of decorative nipple garments seen at right were worn by showgirl Kathleen Manley. When Kathleen left the show, she kept her pasties as a souvenir and recently donated the artifacts to the museum's collection. Adagio dancer Gail Eason recounted her mother's reaction upon seeing her Folies Bergere performance for the first time. Quote, "My mother loves it. She looked at the show and said to me, 'You know, you hardly realize that you don't have much on. It all looks so pretty.'" These two photographs are excellent examples of the elaborate ornament typical on Giarmati's costumes for the production. The designer's keen calculation regarding the covered and uncovered parts of the female form is a distinctive feature of his style. The genre's ultimate intent is to adorn the female form rather than to merely reveal it. The production enlisted the expertise of many varied and talented artisans and technicians. The creative entities such as producer, director, set designer, costume designer, lighting designer, orchestrator, and choreographer were those individuals responsible for conceiving the stage show. The performers, in concert with electricians, stagehands, musicians, and wardrobe assistants, were responsible for giving birth to the show. The cast and crew of the show consisted of at least 115 people. There were a number of dance lines in each edition, including showgirls, dressed dancers, nude dancers, acrobatic dancers, and principals. This slide shows a photograph made during a performance of the Folies Bergere in 1971. Seen pictured at left, Virginia James was cast in the very first edition of the Folies Bergere. Her employment contract stipulated that she perform in, at a minimum, 15 shows per week, for which she earned $108. The photo at right features women from the original cast posing with a promotional sign announcing the opening performance of the Hotel Tropicana's new musical revue. Performers traveled to Las Vegas from all over the world to dance with the Folies Bergere. These folks settled in Las Vegas and endeavored to establish a foundation for their future. Their good fortune was that while earning a living, they were doing something that they absolutely loved. Ginny Murphy was affiliated with the production in varied capacities for many years and described the sentiment of the Folies Bergere cast as such, quote, "People in our show are here because they have a passion for performing. They do not come here to get rich." In this slide, dancers are seen backstage preparing for a performance. The American Folies Bergere was revamped 19 times during its remarkable, almost half-century run at the Tropicana in Las Vegas. Each edition of the show presented new sets, costumes, music, and specialty acts. The stage wear featured in this entertainment genre is known as Cabaret Costume. The style is most notably characterized by a focus on the veiling and unveiling of the female form. Typical rules of placement, coverage, form, and function are ignored, thus obscuring the lines between the seen and unseen. Bird feathers are a traditional design element of the cabaret costume genre. Strategically placed plumes can add dramatic scale to a costume without the burden of a dramatic amount of weight. The inherent lightness of the material makes for an ideal embellishment on dance costumes. On stage, feathers appear to be in a continual state of flight even while the dancer is at a standstill. The costume at left was created in the 1960s and the one at right in early 2000. Feathers, fur, rhinestones, sequins, fishnet stockings, fans, and gloves are all the signature ingredients used to define the allure and the excess of this art form. The costumes of the music hall embrace and celebrate at once the elegant, the absurd, and the erotic. In this slide are a few of Michel Guillermoti's Showgirl Costumes from the 1960s. Within the cabaret canon is a touch of the risque, a hint of the exotic, and a surplus of glamour and a deficit of narrative. The image at left is dated from 1972 and features Carolyn Everett wearing a magnificent Gothic character costume designed by Guillermoti. The photo at right reveals the act's set pieces that are inspired by the stained glass window designs of French cathedrals. This fantasy scene, set in the Middle Ages, cleverly injected a note of piety into an otherwise sensual presentation. Such witty absurdities are inherent to the spirit of the musical revue genre. This research project, and ultimately my book, results from the Nevada State Museum Las Vegas's once-in-a-lifetime acquisition of the entire surviving costume stock from the Hotel Tropicana's Folies Bergere stage production. The significant donation from the Tropicana included more than 8,000 pieces and spans a 50-year time period. The collection includes stage costumes, musical scores, wardrobe department supplies, set props, photographs, ephemera, and renderings from 1959 through 2009. The Folies Bergere archive arrived at the Nevada State Museum in sky-high piles of boxes and bags over the course of a few days in January of 2015. The donation was altogether uncatalogued, uninventoried, and undeniably unorganized. What we would ultimately discover in each pile, box, and bag was still a mystery. The donation posed a considerable cataloging challenge for myself and the costume and textile collection team. Responsible for making sense of the archive, several of my immediate questions were: who wore this? What number was it used in? Which other pieces was it worn with? And in which year or years? And when was it seen on stage? I speculated that the shortest route to comprehension would involve the study of existing photographs documenting the Las Vegas stage show. I also quickly realized that I would need to interview show alumni to not only add context to the photographic evidence, but to accurately navigate the connection between the photographs and the costume artifacts. A local photographic archive has proved instrumental to my research. The Las Vegas News Bureau was established in 1947 to capture the sights and sounds of Las Vegas in an effort to promote the allure of the city to the rest of the world. Over the years, the News Bureau has amassed a comprehensive photograph and film collection showcasing the history of Las Vegas and southern Nevada. The archive includes many staged photographs and film footage of the entertainers and the shows that have performed in Las Vegas. The News Bureau's archive provides stolen moments in time, from which I am able to match the visual statement in the photograph with surviving costumes from the State Museum's archive. The museum's headdress, pictured at left, is evident in the News Bureau photograph, pictured at right. A close examination of the stage shot reveals that all the dancers behind the two principals wear this style headdress. The surviving headdress was in obvious need of conservation, but without access to the News Bureau's photographic archive, I could only speculate concerning the original scale, materials, and context of this costume. Happily, this photograph provided crucial information necessary to execute authentic conservation techniques. Fortunately, authentic costume conservation is possible because the Folies Bergere donation included all existing parts, pieces, findings, and supplies from the show's backstage wardrobe department. Materials such as decorative trims, rhinestones, fabrics, beads, elastic, feathers, and many varied embellishments survive. This slide shows various materials from the show's wardrobe department that are a part of the museum's collection. This slide pictures before and after conservation images of the headdress we looked at in a previous slide. The conserved costume is currently on exhibit at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. And you may wonder why the Mob Museum would choose to include a Folies Bergere costume within its exhibit narrative. Well, this costume is significant to the Mob Museum because it was in use during the time period when the production had a direct connection with organized crime. Joseph V. Augusto, described as a stocky, dynamic, determined man and known as Caesar, was an affiliate of the Kansas City Mob Syndicate. He was credited as the executive producer of the Las Vegas Folies Bergere during the late 1970s. Augusto was inserted as executive producer, explains the Mob Museum's Jeff Schumacher, quote, not because he had any great deal of experience or expertise with production shows, but because there was absolutely no chance he was going to be granted a gaming license to run the Tropicana. The crime family required that Augusto be embedded as a producer in trade for the mob's financial loan to the struggling Tropicana Hotel. Once Augusto was named executive producer, he then had a foot in the door and was able to operate from the inside. Showgirl Marianne Hernandez recalls that it was generally understood among the cast that Augusto and his associates were representing the mob's interests at the casino. She notes that insofar as their paychecks cleared, the cast and crew were not overly concerned about who it was that was signing them. The correspondence pictured in this slide is addressed to Marianne from Joe Augusto, dated August 16, 1977. It reads, quote, I have watched you recently perform other people's parts in the Folies Bergere and feel you have done an outstanding job. I wish to convey to you my appreciation for the excellent work you are doing and hope that we can use your talent in a more advantageous way in our future show. And it's signed with regards, Joseph V. Augusto. I assume that this note served to maintain the appearance that Augusto was in fact significantly involved in the day-to-day operations of the production. Augusto's statement about performing other people's parts refers to Marianne's position in the show as a swing dancer. A swing dancer, in addition to performing their own assigned part, had to memorize all the choreography for other dancers and would be called on to fill in for an absent performer. Augusto's relationship with the Folies Bergere came to an end when the Kansas City mob's cash skim at the Tropicana was ultimately exposed and dissolved by the FBI in early '79. This bizarre photo pictures a showgirl holding a hard hat and posing next to a piece of heavy equipment. The discordant shot is designed to advertise the hotel casino's expansion during 1978. Showgirls were often employed for this type of moonlighting modeling work. Note that the Tropicana's marquee credits Augusto with a top billing. As it happened, about the same time that the State Museum acquired the Folies Bergere collection, University of Nevada, Las Vegas's Special Collections received a significant donation from a man named Jerry Jackson. Jerry Jackson's creative collaboration with the Folies Bergere commenced in 1966 and extended through the show's closing curtain in 2009. From '75 forward, Jackson was the Las Vegas production's architect and patriarch. His indispensable contributions encompass a broad range of disciplines, including creative director, choreographer, musical composer, lyricist, and costume designer. Mr. Jackson's donation to the university included costume renderings, show notes, purchase orders, photographs, working sketches, set designs, and editorial coverage of the Vegas show. At left is Jackson's costume rendering for a male dancer from the 1983 edition of the Folies Bergere. The photo at right shows the realized costume, which is included in the State Museum's archive. Jackson developed 110 separate costumes for the '83 edition of the production. The Jackson archive has been an important point of reference for identification and interpretation of the museum's Folies Bergere costume collection. Seen in this slide are Polaroid photographs taken during initial costume fittings for the show's Can-Can number. These Polaroids offer both front and rear views of two separate costume designs for the '83 edition of the production. Jackson's original costume renderings include material swatches, his handwritten notations concerning construction details, a listing of the performers assigned to each costume, and the total number of each design slated to be built for the production. As it's not unusual for a complete costume to consist of 10 separate items, the details noted on these sketches have been invaluable for identifying all the various parts and pieces included in each costume. Jackson's sketch at left indicates that 2 of these costumes were to be built, one for Heidi Hagenbach, seen in the photograph at right, and another for showgirl Debbie Lee. The study of the Jerry Jackson archive offers a behind-the-scenes understanding of the production from a designer's point of view. The fascinating document at left details the pre-production budget for the '83 edition of the Folies Bergere, with costume department line items totaling over $400,000. The image at right shows one costume idea during Jackson's design process. You can see how Mr. Jackson has simply pinned various trims to a dress form in an effort to communicate his ideas to the team responsible for building the costumes. Seen at left in this slide is a charming Folies Bergere headdress found in the State Museum's collection. At far right is the rendering of this headdress included in UNLV's Jerry Jackson's Papers archive. The center photo featured dancers Terry Thorndike and Sherry Murault, each wearing the headdress. Terry shared this image from her personal collection, and it represents another community element which has helped me interpret the museum's Folies Bergere donation. Once the community got word that the State Museum had acquired the Folies Bergere collection, I discovered that the majority of the show's alumni had personal mini archives of photographs and ephemera related to their term with the show. Typically, these images are candid snapshots that capture intimate, sociable, and behind-the-curtain moments. In this slide, playful occasions backstage and between stage cues are recorded. I especially love the early snapshots made in the Folies Bergere dressing rooms. These photographs capture many fascinating behind-the-scenes details of the production. In both these photos, ladies are shown cigarette smoking in the dressing rooms. This was allowed at the Tropicana up through the early 1980s. Often, the cast and crew's amateur photographs fill in missing components of the narrative in ways that the photographer would never have imagined. The Las Vegas News Bureau shot mostly in black and white film during the 60s and 70s, so it's been a challenge to decipher the actual color of costumes pictured in their photographs. Folies Bergere acrobat Lori Kassler-Rich shared the color snapshot seen at left, which pictures her in the same costume seen in the black and white photograph at right. Lori's dressing room photograph provides visual information concerning quite a few of the costumes from this edition of the production. Behind her, on the hanging rod, are nearly a dozen costumes shown in color and awaiting their turn on stage. At left is another wonderful candid snapshot from showgirl Lisa Maloof Bedford's collection. This image provides an important look at the details of the Folies Bergere hair and makeup design during the middle 1960s. It also identifies an object donated to the State Museum's collection. The earring pictured at right, now missing a few teardrop stones, is evident at center in the snapshot. Not only does the photograph help us to authentically conserve this piece of jewelry, it also assists with the accurate dating of the artifact. The production's wardrobe department consisted of up to 18 women who were responsible for maintaining the custom costumes and for dressing the performers during the show. From 1959 to 1974, all of the show's costumes were designed and manufactured in Europe, then imported to Las Vegas. These early Folies Bergere costumes were designed and built to survive a 2-year run and to withstand the rigors of 15 shows per week. The photograph at left pictures wardrobe mistress May Burke attending to showgirl Felicia Adkins in the mid-1960s. Miss Burke was head of wardrobe from 1959 through at least 75. At right, the Folies Bergere wardrobe team are pictured in their workroom at the Tropicana Hotel in 1983. A staple of the music hall and of the Folies Bergere is the time-honored can-can dance. Every edition of the Folies Bergere included a scene featuring the iconic dance. Typically, the entire cast was included in these high-energy and raucous routines. The lifting and boisterous manipulation of the ruffled petticoat skirts are playful and established movements of the can-can dance. One of the great values in the museum's Folies Bergere collection is discovered in the community's collective memory of and experience with the preserved artifacts. This slide pictures at top Folies Bergere acrobat dancer Kim Kephart Randusky displaying the underskirts of her can-can costume. Kim recalls that the burdensome weight of the numerous gathered and layered rows of cotton that make up the can-can costume's substantial petticoat. As the role of the performer is to suspend reality, the audience would have no insight into the challenges of executing high kicks, cartwheels, back bends, and jump splits while wearing a garment of this scale. The lower image shows a traditional kick line of can-can dancers in the 1973 edition of the Folies Bergere. All of this acrobatic dancing was executed in the 2.5-inch heels of the Can-Can Costumes character boots. Acrobatic dancer Krista Kensler donated a number of her Folies Bergere objects and ephemera to the State Museum. Included in the donation were her well-worn can-can boots, along with their original sales receipt. In this photo at left, taken at the museum, Krista is pointing out all of the leather patchwork present on the boots and the distinct areas of wear. She notes that she routinely refused the wardrobe department's imploring offers of a replacement pair because she felt that the boots were perfectly broken in at their current level of destruction. The receipt dated September of '87 from Tal's Bootery totals $238.50 for Krista's single pair of women's can-can boots. Another fascinating bit of ephemera donated by Krista is the document pictured here. As noted in a show program from the 1970s, a Folies Bergere showgirl averaged between 5'8" and 6'2" in height, and they usually weighed from 110 to 135 pounds. Performers were required to maintain a consistent body weight during their employment with the Folies Bergere. The ideal weight was recorded on the day the performer signed their contract with the show. If they strayed too far from the original weight number, Hotel Tropicana management would issue what was called a personal appearance notice or a warning slip. This slide pictures a personal appearance notice issued to Krista in January of '81. It reads, "Per your contract, paragraph number 7, please be advised that a weight reduction is required from you at this time. A substantial amount of time will be given to you for this reduction. In the event you do not comply with this notice, immediate action will be taken." The noted substantial amount of time to cure was typically only a few weeks. The relationships established from my outreach to the community have been invaluable as I continue to decipher the collection. Here, acrobatic dancer Leslie Borges is pictured holding a costume she wore on the Folies Bergere stage in 1980. Leslie was the final performer to be assigned to this costume, and so her name, handwritten onto a woven name tag, still appears at the interior of the costume. Many of the dancers identify this particular costume as their least favorite, although Leslie is tickled and proud that she is a part of the museum's permanent collection. Folies Bergere dancer Jan Russell provided this photograph as evidential proof that these costumes were loathed by the cast. Indeed, the women looked none too pleased, and they blamed their aversion on the diapery briefs. The Folies Bergere was originally staged at the Hotel Tropicana's Fountain Theater. The Fountain Theater was billed as one of the world's most magnificent showrooms. Positioned at either wing of the stage were stairs leading to elevated and curved platforms serving as extensions of the proscenium stage. This photograph is taken stage right inside the Fountain Theater and looks across the room. The unique proscenium stage included a passerelle or a bridge that extended out and into the audience via a ramp that encircled the orchestra pit, affording the audience a detailed view of the performers and their elaborate costumes. In this photo from 1962, note that the orchestra conductor and a number of his musicians protrude from the pit above stage level. Displaying pink architectural elements, furnishings, and stage curtains, unsurprisingly, the venue was nicknamed the Pink Room. With a close examination of the stage curtains in this photo, you are better able to visualize how the Fountain Theater stage dramatically wrapped around the audience. The panoramic presentation resulted in a theater experience that was intimate, enchanting, and breathtaking. In the mid-1960s, the production introduced a number titled Carousels de Paris. This magical scene included two carousels that descended from above and directly over the seated audience. Each carousel featured spectacular galloping horses that the showgirls and showboys sat upon. As the cast were positioned riding on the horses, the carousels made their descent directly over the heads of the audience. Folies Bergere alumna Gwen Burney was one of the performers who appeared on the suspended carousels. She remembers that getting into position on the carousel was treacherous and scary, but once it began its descent, it was really fun. This fantabulous photo dates from 1962 and provides a good look at the wide open orchestra pit of the original Fountain Theater stage at the Hotel Tropicana. The open orchestra pit would prove to be so precarious for the performers that eventually a prophylactic net was installed to catch the cast when one of them inadvertently stepped off the stage, slipping into the pit. Note in this photograph the inherent perils of being a member of Ray Sinatra's Tropicana Orchestra in 1962. In this fascinating photograph, it's evident that the stage is unable to contain the showgirl's enormous character costume, and the excess yardage finds its way into the orchestra pit to muss with a few musicians' hairdos. This photo on the left clearly illustrates why so many performers have entertaining stories about falling into the orchestra pit. Notice how close the showgirls are positioned to the edge of the pit. Orchestra leader Cy Zentner is pictured positioned in the pit. Folies Bergere cast have quite a few tales to tell about Mr. Zentner's pranks carried out during the performances. A detailed study of this image afforded the identification of a fantastic pair of boots found in the State Museum's collection. False eyelashes are an essential accessory of the showgirl. They serve to define, highlight, and animate eyes that would otherwise appear vague from the perspective of the audience. Whether spiky, shaggy, feathery, or fluffy, false eyelashes effectively thwart the fading effects of bright stage lights. At times, layered in triplicate, they proved weighty, hindered vision, and had a tendency to graze the cheek with each blink of the eye. The pictured showgirl's false eyelashes are most definitely of the spiky variety. Rio Noel donated a few of her showgirl eyelashes to the museum. Noel danced with the Folies Bergere in the mid-1970s, and she told me the story of her handmade false eyelashes. She describes how she cut her eyelashes out of black construction paper and then curled the fringed paper cutouts onto a pencil to shape and set. At left, Rio's handmade paper eyelashes are pictured, and at right, Rio is seen posing in front of the show's grand staircase. Twins Terry and Sherry Bartlett were cast separately into the show in 1970. Terry was the first of the two to audition, and after winning a position in the cast, the show's producers, not realizing that Terry was a twin, jokingly asked her, "Do you happen to have a sister?" Interestingly, Terry and Sherry both married Folies Bergere castmates, and they still reside in Las Vegas. Here at left, Terry and Sherry are pictured in 1970, and at right is a current photograph of the twins. The sisters were not cast into the show as a twin act, but the Folies Bergere has a fascinating legacy of showcasing twin sister acts. The Bel Air sisters were featured performers in the Vegas Folies Bergere during the late 1960s. Although billed as sisters and presented as twins, they really were not twins nor even sisters. They were just two talented performers who happened to look like one another. The Bel Air sisters are pictured at left on stage. The Dodge twins were American sisters cast in the Parisian Folies Bergere during the Jazz Age. Seen at right, these two lovelies were featured on the show's program in 1928. Columnist Jack Sheehan with the Las Vegas Review-Journal newspaper described Felicia Atkins as, quote, the most publicized showgirl in Las Vegas history. Sheehan further concludes that, quote, with her raven hair, dark eyes, full lips, and overwhelming bosom, Felicia was the essence of the unattainable goddess that the guy from Topeka could take home in his dreams. Felicia represented to the world everything it thought a showgirl should be, and more, unquote. Felicia Atkins, cast in 1961, toured the country in promotion of the stage show and was the face of the Folies Bergere during her 18-and-a-half-year reign. The photo at left features Felicia in 1969, dressed in her costume for the number titled 1002 Nights. At right, a backstage snapshot captures Miss Atkins celebrating her birthday with a cake in a Folies Bergere dressing room. Describing what it was like to be a Las Vegas showgirl, Felicia recalled, quote, everywhere I went, I was treated like a movie star, a queen. The showgirl in those days was very well respected, and I always was made to feel like somebody special, unquote. In 1969, a television special was filmed on the Folies Bergere stage. Gene Kelly's Wonderful World of Girls included a segment with American film star Gene Kelly and the Folies Bergere female cast. In these photos, Felicia Atkins is pictured left of Kelly, and showgirl Joyce Grayson on Kelly's right. Felicia was not a trained dancer, singer, nor acrobat. She was hired to perform as a mannequin or showgirl. Some early showgirls were not required to have any formal dance background and were often selected based on their physical look, charisma, and personality. It is understandable yet unfortunate that the men of the cabaret genre do not get their due. Typically, the role of the male dancers is to focus audience attention on the presentation of the females. In this slide, the men literally frame the woman, directing audience eyes to the beauty and the spectacle of the showgirl. In general, the mere physical existence of men on stage serves as a stark contrast that further emphasizes the splendor of the feminine form. This wonderful photo features leading lady Liliane Montevecchi playing the role of the fantasy bride in 1965. The male performers were frequently costumed in classic and elegant tailcoats and tuxedos. Costume designer Jerry Jackson simply states, I wanted the men to look like men when describing his aesthetic for the Folies Bergere show boy costumes. The men seen in this slide are wearing jumpsuits paired with cropped tuxedo jackets. The jumpsuit is an extremely functional dance garment as it maintains a clean, lean line during all types of choreography. In this slide, we see two instances when the men were assigned untraditional costumes. At left, petite Parisienne Audrey Arnaud is pictured elevated by a few good men in a thrilling lift sequence. This number is remembered as a stylistic departure for the Folies Bergere. The unadorned yet striking contemporary costumes are indeed a deviation from designer Guillermo's typical more is more approach. The playful and substantial tassel seen at center front on the men's costumes was ultimately removed because it interfered with the dance routine. The men's Tyrolean folk costumes, seen at right, were charming and convincing adaptations of the traditional. Another significant role of the cabaret show boy was to assist the showgirls with their costumes. This photograph from '67 pictures a showgirl wearing a colossal robe that draped the length of the grand staircase and required the support of a handful of showboys. This slide pictures another example of the Folies Bergere showboys supporting the weight of an enormous showgirl costume. In this dramatic scene from the 1962 edition, showgirl Felicia Atkins wears the imperial robe of an empress, with the men dressed in classic Roman gladiator costumes. Describing his affection for the show in 1959, Las Vegas Sun editor Hank Greenspun wrote, quote, "The Folies Bergere transplants you to another world with a lovely continental atmosphere that moves so fast the audience doesn't realize it's over until they spontaneously come to their feet to salute the most artistic of acts." Unquote. This photograph captures the Venetian-style curtain coming down on the Folies Bergere theater stage in 1961. On the evening of March 28, 2009, in the aftermath of tens of thousands of performances, the world-famous Folies Bergere presented their final performance. This community loss is tempered with the knowledge that the Nevada State Museum, Las Vegas, has taken responsibility for preserving the legacy of the Folies Bergere in Las Vegas. The museum's Folies Bergere archive documents an important and exciting chapter in Las Vegas's history and serves to further define and distinguish the costume and textile collection at the Nevada State Museum, Las Vegas, as one of the preeminent museum collections of cabaret costume in the world. This slide pictures just a few of the cabaret costumes found in the museum's Folies Bergere archive. Well, there's so much more to talk about, but I know I need to wrap up. So if I've sparked your curiosity, you'll find many additional photographs, documents, costume renderings, and fascinating tidbits related to the show in my book, The Folies Bergere in Las Vegas. Thank you so much for your interest in this fascinating bit of history.
All right, thank you very much, Karan. And we've had some great questions that have come in over the course of your presentation, which you have answered many of them, particularly what was required of the dancers and about whether the costumes were reused or how they were treated. But I think the number one question that we are getting is, how did they balance those headdresses on their heads?
Yes.
What kind of training did they have to go through to do that?
Yes, I think of these showgirls, they're such athletes because there's nothing easy about that. In the collection at the Nevada State Museum, we have quite a few of these headdresses, and I weighed every single one of them to really try to figure out what was that number, what is the heaviest headdress we have in the collection. And the heaviest one we have basically weighs the same as a bowling ball. So if you can visualize that, right? But it wasn't easy, and a lot of the showgirls tell really fascinating stories about learning to find that center of balance with the headdress. And these pieces, like really mini sculptures that sat on top of the head, they really were built with a foundation that, they were brilliantly built so that once you were able to find that foundation, you could figure it out. But it wasn't easy. The other fun anecdotes from the showgirls about their headdresses is some of these things are huge. And there's one in particular from the Folies Bergere show in 1975, and they called it the Yucca Headdress. And the Yucca Headdress, it literally was like this sort of, this kind of sunburst shape made out of these speared points that went all around the head. And a handful of women tell me stories about how that speared headdress got caught on the stage curtain. And it would get caught, and of course, it would end up going with them, and they'd have to go backwards. And the difficult thing is that these headdresses, they needed to be strapped onto the head with an under the chin strap. So it wasn't like if your headdress got caught on the stage curtain, it just left you. It still was attached to you. And so you had to sort of figure out what to do from there. And so there's a lot of really entertaining wardrobe malfunctions that happened with these crazy costumes.
I can only imagine. So that gives a rise to, I'm guessing the lightest costume was the one that everyone hated with the diaper pants. But what was the heaviest costume that you found in the collection and that you preserved?
I did the same thing with all the costumes. When there are so many costumes in the collection, I needed to figure out what the weight was going to be that was going to be hanging on our storage rods at the museum. And I need to calculate how much weight do these rods need to hold. So I set about weighing everything, and the heaviest costume was about 20 pounds. And this costume was a floor-length gown made of upholstery weight velvet, and it was all flat-lying, so it was at least 2 to 3 layers of fabric. It had a huge foundation built into it, and it was all embellished with glass and rhinestones. So there was a lot of metal and glass, and that added up to 20 pounds. And remember, this is just the dress part of the costume. This didn't include the headdress and the gloves and the bracelets and the necklaces and the shoes and the stockings, right? Or any other parasol accessories or anything else. So these women really had to get used to carrying this amount of weight on stage and do it in a way where the audience never really thought that they were carrying a 20-pound dress, right? It needed to look effortless. And that is the skill of these athletes, is to make it look effortless, wearing almost 40 pounds worth of a garment and walking down the stairs and not being able to look down while you're doing it.
And watching out for the orchestra pit too.
Exactly. So these are really skilled men and women, that's for sure.
Well, they must have incredible core strength even before they even knew what core strength was.
I think so.
So let me bring costume and fashion together. I noticed that one of the labels on one of the costumes carried the Nolan Miller label. And I think many people know that about Nolan Miller, and certainly from Dynasty and his work on stage and theater and then in fashion, but also about Bob Mackie and his partner Ray Agarian. Were there any quote-unquote mainstream fashion designers who contributed fashion designs to the costumes?
Well, in the Folies Bergere, I would say Nolan Miller serves that. Before I started researching the Folies Bergere, I had no idea of Nolan Miller's career in the cabaret. I, of course, knew him as the Emmy Award-winning television designer for Dynasty and other fantastic shows of the period. But I didn't know he also was doing this kind of work. So it was really fun for me to discover how really different his artistry was for the stage in comparison to the television work. They are such different genres with different needs and requirements and demands. But he had a really big career, Nolan Miller, for a lot of years. For the Folies Bergere, he designed the brand new 1975 edition, and then he designed the 1980 edition. And all the shows for the Folies Bergere before that were designed by Parisians. So Nolan Miller was the first American to design the costumes for the Folies Bergere in Vegas. So it's very cool. We don't have the collection. A lot of those things were destroyed. We have a number of Nolan Miller costumes still in the collection. but not as many as I would love to have. So I'm still sort of looking for some of those pieces to fill in. We have some of Nolan's original sketches for the show in the collection, which is super helpful and exciting to be able to pair the original sketch with the resulting costume. That's always a fascinating look at the evolution of a design process.
Tremendous, tremendous. Well, I guess one thing that comes to mind that I know, because I am a member of Costume Society of America, as you are, that you are a panelist, and I think the judge of the costume design competitions that the Costume Society has sponsors, and that you're involved in teaching and training a new generation of costume designers. And what I guess the question I'm curious about is, how has this inspired a new generation of costume and particularly cabaret costume designers, the work that you have curated for the Folies Bergere?
Well, I think that my goal is, in terms of the museum collection, is to make sure that we accurately preserve and document the histories of these pieces so that the next generation can study how they were made, how they were built, in terms of reference to their function. These are so unique pieces because they just got so much work, right? 15 shows a week for sometimes decades. A certain edition would run. The foundations that you find in these pieces are super significant and uniquely built to serve that long-running purpose. And there aren't a lot of these cabaret shows left in the world. There are certain parts of the world in Paris. There's still a cabaret scene. Berlin has a nice cabaret scene. But they're not the popularity that we saw in Vegas from 1960 through the 80s. That really is kind of gone. So folks revisiting this genre, which and I kind of hope that Las Vegas at some point in time revisits this showgirl genre. Right now, there aren't a lot of classic, traditional showgirl shows in Vegas, but I think it's cyclical, and I think perhaps we might get back to that. So, what students of cabaret will be able to find at the museum are these mid-century pieces that they can study. And remember, they're super interesting to study because a lot of these pieces were built before we had access to elasticized fabrics like spandex. And if you think of designing these pieces without the use of spandex, you realize that there's a lot of technical skill in making pieces that are able to shape and fit the body without the use of an elasticized fabric. So there's a lot of really interesting research to be done here, just looking at the inside of pieces. So I'm hoping that this collection will be used by future students.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think in my own work, working with museums and archival materials, it is exciting to see people come in, and you're right. This was before Spanx. This was before spandex, before many things, where basically some of these are sort of held together by an ace bandage and a rhinestone. And so it's great to see those techniques. So what's next for you? What new projects intrigue you? I know right now it's a challenging and difficult time for particularly live entertainment and costuming for live entertainment. But you are a very multi-talented writer who finds inspiration in the Star Wars costumes, certainly in Liberace costumes, which could be another whole show, from Marilyn Monroe's sense of style. These have all been books. What new projects intrigue you? What's next for you?
Yeah, well, since I've moved to Vegas, I've sort of fallen in love with the Vegas stage costumes and am really intent on telling the stories from our Vegas stages. So, for instance, I've started a big research project concerning the costumes of the stage show called Jubilee, which was designed by Bob Mackey and Pete Menifee. And the State Museum has a number of original sketches from that show, which is a really fun research project. And then I am also interested right now, just due to the loss of both Siegfried and Roy in this last year, of beginning a research project that documents their stage wardrobe over the decades. And so I'm hoping to be able to develop some sort of project that showcases and celebrates and documents their unique little lane in history and in Vegas history.
Oh, tremendous. Great. Well, we look forward to that. And once again, thank you on behalf of the Fashion Committee and the National Arts Club for your contribution to our programming. It will be available online through YouTube. Plus, there's also books, your book as well. We very much appreciate it. Appreciate your time and expertise. And one last time, ooh la la.
Ooh la la.
Have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kendall.
A pleasure. Take care.
All right.